I actually had to go and look up online the Snail Beach District Railway. It's quite an interesting little line, probably one which most people, myself included, weren't familiar with, but I really like the weathering on this. Hi there everyone, welcome back up here to the loft with me, Jenny Kirk. It's really great to see you, I hope I find you well. And today we're going to be taking a look at something from the Bachmann Narrow Gauge range. Now, as you all know, we've been building Project OO9, also known as Mynydd Tatis, which is Potato Mountain in Welsh. And we really needed some motive power to go with that. And I really liked the look of these Bachmann Baldwins, so I was lucky enough to be able to purchase a couple of these. So I'm going to take a really good close look with you. And don't forget that this video comes in association with our sponsor, Train-O-Matic, makers of DCC decoders and accessories. And we will be doing a full DCC install using one of the Train-O-Matic Next 18 decoders. So I'll show you exactly how to do that. Also, don't forget that you can check out the affiliate links in the description box, the best place to go and get your own Bachmann Baldwins. So do go and check those out if you like what you see in today's video. But let's go and take a closer look, and I'm really excited to show you these. Now, the Baldwin Class 10-12-D was one of the big announcements when Bachmann announced that they were going to start bringing out an OO9 range. And I've got here two of the different versions. Now, there are, of course, more than two, but what really caught my eye about these is actually the different detail versions available. So fundamentally, they're all a Baldwin, but there's a lot of differences with things like cabs, and I think it's 3 different cab variants across the range, and I love it when manufacturers do this and give the facility to have something a little bit different, and there's a good excuse there for having more than one member of the class. And also it means that they're more likely to represent the particular prototype that you are looking to have on your own railway. Now, the boxes for the Bachmann Narrow Gauge, these are the first that I've had, although I'm guessing quite a few of you might be familiar with these. They come in green and red, look outwardly pretty similar to the blue and red boxes that we're all really used to. And I had actually thought that they were the same form factor as the wagon boxes, but alas, my OCD has grimaced, because you can see they're just slightly different, and that's a shame in one particular way, because I use the fold flat crates that are sold at a number of supermarkets and a particular DIY chain. I don't like to drop brands, but their initials are B&Q, and so these aren't going to quite fit in storage, but it's not a big gripe. But let's get these out of the box, although first of all, let's just show you the catalogue numbers of the two which I have got. So we've got 391032 and 391030. So 032, it's the really quite pretty southern lined green as E763, named as Sid. And it's something, I think that this was for the Linton and Barnstable, one of the locomotives that they had. And certainly it's something that will appeal if you've got one of the southern green livery Manning Wardles from Hellion. But even in its own right, actually, it really caught my eye. It's one of the really standout liveries when I was looking at these online. So I picked myself up one of those. And then this one was the factory weathered one that I found. I don't know, at the time of looking, I couldn't find any other weathered ones for sale, but they do seem to have sold quite well. So there may have been other ones, but this is the Snail Beach District Railways black weathered. And I actually had to go and look up online the Snail Beach District Railways. Quite an interesting little line, probably one which most people, myself included, weren't familiar with. But I really like the weathering on this. Now, when you view them online, it's very easy to actually overlook the fact that these are quite small. Really quite surprised how small these were. So it was a pleasant surprise when they did come. And you just see them plopping out of the box here, very tightly folded. This is the instructions that comes with it, and it gives you full information on lubrication for routine maintenance, and a few other detail differences. So it says accessories, water tank hose, but I know from looking at this that that is actually already applied. And just looking through, we've also got some information about Dcc Fitting this, and we're going to be doing, in association with our sponsor Trainomatic, a full Dcc fitting guide. And this model takes the Next 18 decoder. So what I've done is I've picked out a couple of the Trainomatic Next 18 decoders, and they are actually really, really nice and small. What also surprised me reading through some of the information, this, if you're wondering, is just an invitation to join the Bachmann Collectors Club, is that these locomotives are natively supporting sound. They've actually got the speaker pre-fitted, just like we saw with the Rails Dapol Terrier. These two, it says, have a pre-fitted speaker. And I find it amazing that a locomotive this small can actually support natively a DCC sound, and it really is truly amazing. Let's just get it out of the standard clamshell blister pack. I'm just going to move the packaging out of the way, and you can see there just how small and really quite delicate. Although I say delicate, it looks delicate, but actually it does feel quite robust, and there's a plenty of weight in there. So I'm just going to put that carefully down there. And to give you an idea of the size, I'm going to pick out a Bachmann wagon. So there we have a standard Bachmann vacuum braked ventilated van. And you can see there that actually it is smaller just than a ventilated van. So really quite amazing that they've packed so much into something this small. I'm going to get the other one out as well, and something I noticed with this one, which is just a little bit different, quite apart from the fact that the cab actually is a different design, and it's why these are quite a good pair to show you. But in amongst all of the same packaging that we've got there, we've got the same instructions. It also comes with a set of etched work plates and name plates, and it's just a nice little extra touch. So I'm just going to put those to one side, and it does mean that if you want to go down that etched route, then you don't need to purchase anything extra. I'm going to get this now out of the packaging, just put all that in a pile over there, and you can see here it's already got printed on it the SID nameplate and the number plate on the back as well. And as I said, they come in the packaging as etched versions as well, which you can just put over the top should you so wish. I'm actually going to just leave it with the printing that's already on it. I don't like applying etched nameplates, and I think that those are actually quite super. So I'm quite happy with that. And when we put these two next to each other, you can see there that we have that different cab design. So we've got the shorter cab with the exposed bunker, and then on this one we've got the longer cab which goes over the top of that bunker. And we're also got, as a detail difference between these two, that's got that water hose which the southern version doesn't have, and the southern version does also come with through train braking, which the Snail Beach Tramway one does not. The model itself, as I said, is very, very well weighted, and even though you look at it and you think, well, where are they going to put that weight, given that there's space to DCC fit this and it supports sound, and they've managed it. It does feel like that these water tanks either side of the boiler do have a great deal of weight in there, and I suspect that there's also weight underneath the coal load as well. If I turn it over, you can see there OO9, really, really quite fine wheels. And what's interesting is that this is at a 460, but the method of construction that Bachmann have used, the back wheels of the front bogie are actually fixed to the rest of the chassis there. They do have a degree of side play, as do some of the other axles, and it's only the front two wheels which are free to move on this pivot. But from pretty much all viewing angles, you'd never know any different. I do also particularly like that air gap that you can see there underneath the boiler through the motion. It really is nicely done. And when I was at Statfold Barn, there was one of these prototypes looking very, very sorry for itself, sat waiting restoration. It may even have gone to start restoration. I did read somewhere that they'd struck a deal for one of their Baldwins to go and be restored. I don't know whether it was the one that I saw whilst I was there, but Bachmann have really captured that look underneath the boiler, this typical very open, designed for maximum ease of maintenance, because of course these were designed primarily for running the trench railways in World War I. Huge numbers of these were shipped over, built to work in Europe by the Baldwin Locomotive Company, and after the war a lot of these were then sold on, which is how pretty much all of these ended up on little railways around the UK. There was almost a renaissance of the small narrow gauge industrial line, and these locomotives just cropped up everywhere. I suspect that there's not a narrow gauge line in the UK that hasn't had at least one of these run on them. Indeed, one of the options that's available from Bachmann is the Welsh Highland Railway example in a very, very nice maroon, although at the time of filming this I could only find it available in factory sound fitted form, which really did intrigue me, but I couldn't justify the price. It was a case of either getting two like this DC ready or getting one sound fitted, and believe me, it was a bit of a tough call, but I decided to go for these in the end. Now I'm going to compare these two, and one of the things that neither of these has got, but which I have seen online, is that there is at least one version that has a kind of flippable chimney cap. It doesn't appear on these. So there's just so many different detail differences. It is really nice to see. I'm just looking to see what else. We've got these kind of eyebrows over the front spectacle glasses, and you can see there that the southern variety doesn't have them. Really, really good for just cutting out glare from the sun, I guess, and keeping a bit of the weather off. But it's just an example of some of the subtle detail differences that Bachmann has tooled for. Now, I'm looking into the cab, and it's just a bit difficult to see, but they do look to be largely identical in there. It's quite interesting. The glazing has been done with a solid plastic bar across the top of the front of the cabs. We see this a lot. It is a shame. I've seen some really lovely flush glazed models of late, but again, these are so small that it's not necessarily all that noticeable. And one of the things that these open cabs does really, really kind of encourage is fitting of a locomotive crew that would obscure all of that. There is, especially in this southern version, an awful lot of detail on display, and you can see there is so much detail going on. So I'm looking at the rest of the detail on this model, and really there's a lot of pretty fine detail. The rivets on the front of the smoke box do look a little bit fuzzy, although when you actually see these War Department Baldwins, a lot of the metalwork does show signs of use and abuse, and an awful lot of coats of paint. It was always the military way that if it didn't move, then paint it, so you didn't want to stand around for too long. One thing that has really been done well, I like the front faces of these wheels. You can see there with the counterweights, and these are on this model finished in the same Monsal green. Really nicely done, and it's quite an exquisite Walschaerts valve gear as well that we see there, with all metal crosshead, and it does come across as being very reliable. Now, I've had these models running on Manithtatis. I keep trying to make sure I pronounce that correctly, probably butchering the Welsh. But it's stood up to going through all that point work really, really well. At the moment, Manithtatis is set up to run on DC, and both of these locomotives ran really pretty much faultlessly. There's no sign of derailment, even through things like the Y points. None at all, even though I was a little bit skeptical at first of this fixed wheel, but actually it doesn't cause a problem whatsoever. The rest of the model, really nicely done, and I particularly like one of the characteristics of these Baldwins is this kind of gap between the tanks and the front of the cabs, and that has, all of the detail is there, although you can just look down there, there is a kind of a line where I think the top part of the body lifts off the lower part, which I'm presuming stays with the chassis. Now, the motor on these is actually surprisingly powerful. I loaded them up with train lengths that looked pretty prototypical for how they're going to be running on the layout, and there was no sign of slippage whatsoever. So I haven't really put them to the ultimate test. I don't actually own enough OO9 rolling stock, but I was more than happy with the performance. Again, on the cab roof there, the rivet detail is exquisitely done, and I'm actually interested to compare them both there, because we've got the slightly different design of cab roof, and you can see that in reality, in real life, a lot of these mods were kind of bolt-on extras, so you can see there that between the two that has been really nicely modelled with that kind of strip that I guess would be allowing that extra piece on the back to have been bolted on. Looking to the backs of these models, the Snail Beach version, quite apart from having that extra cab extension over the bunker, we've also got this representation of the water hose. Now, the way that these worked is that they actually were able, using a steam-powered kind of like a vacuum pump, to suck water from streams, ditches, ponds, anything that was close by. So you didn't really need dedicated watering facilities, and probably something that on a very cheaply built railway line or tramway where facilities weren't put in if they weren't absolutely necessary, this was actually an ideal feature. You just pull up next to the village pond, anywhere that was within reach of the hose, dunk the, it's kind of like a rose that they have on the end, which if you've ever seen one, imagine a kind of a globe or a ball with lots of tiny holes drilled in, and that screws into the end of the hose, and the whole idea behind that is that any large pieces of detritus don't end up getting sucked up into the tank. Certainly you don't want to end up with a water tank full of fishes, which is not entirely unheard of with locomotives having to stop for an emergency watering from a pond. And indeed, Reverend Wilbur Awdry did write about that, from what I remember, in one of his books. So sure that that was based on real life proceedings. The Snail Beach locomotive has a much more austere black livery with this silvery grey on the smoke box, the stack, and the front running plate there and the cab roof. But everything else is just a very plain black, although we do have the number 4 and the red buffer beam, although these locomotives don't actually carry buffers. Really, really nicely done. And what really makes this model for me is that very, very light dusting of weathering, and that really brings out this livery. I think if it didn't have the weathering, then this livery could have been a bit bland, almost like it was waiting for lining or insignia to be added to it. But the weathering just makes it. It mutes down that almost plainer black, and I particularly like the way that it's muted down these red buffer beams. Really nicely done. And it actually did turn my eye when I was looking at these online at the different versions that are available. The weathered version stuck out because of how nice, subtle but effective this weathering has been done. Other than the aforementioned cab and those eyebrows on the spectacle glasses, there aren't really a lot of other differences between these, apart from maybe the brakes. And you can see on SID there, we have got some extra piping to go with the braking system, just down along underneath the running plate. And it's little touches like this. I just like how there's very much this attention to detail, so that bits of detail that only need to be applied to a particular version are only applied to that version. And it does mean that these locomotives reward scrutiny. The more you look at them, the more there is to look at. And all in all, I am really pleased with these models. And like I said to you before, they are absolutely tiny models. The photographs that you see online, I guess, don't really quite show up just how tiny these models are. I mean, I can put both of these into the palm of my hand. There you are. Amazingly small, and yet that doesn't compromise the running qualities. We had them running on the layout and they just romped away. One of the other areas that I really like on these, and it was something that I flagged up with a model that I reviewed some time ago from a different manufacturer, is that with these, Bachmann have not fallen into the mistake of using one cab front to represent all models and leaving extra holes for different detail options still there in the tooling. On these Baldwins, that isn't the case, and the extra pipe that you see on SID just there, just hooked around, there is a hole in the front of the cab that locates into that is not there on Snail Beach tramways, and that's really good. It's that kind of attention to detail that I think really does show a well thought out model with a myriad of tooling options to make sure that each different version comes out just right. So we're coming now to the DCC fitting guide, and what I recommend is one of the Trainomatic Next 18 decoders, which is quite small, and as we can see from the instructions, it recommends a decoder not bigger than 10mm by 20mm, which this does conform to. Of course, that really does come into its own if you're choosing a sound decoder, because they do tend to be bigger. So looking at the instructions, it is quite clear what we need to do. Remove some of the detailing ready for this full front section of the tanks and boiler to lift off once we've undone 2 screws underneath. So I've done a trial run. So SID is fitted, so I made sure that I knew what I was doing before I went to fit Snail Beach number 4. So other tools you're going to need, I recommend a pair of tweezers, and then we need the trusty jeweler's screwdriver, and we need a small crosshead screw. So first up, following the advice in the Bachmann instructions, just very carefully lift out the pipework, and just these 2 pipes, and that just lifts out. Once we've got those free, of course, depending on model, on SID, you'll see that there's an extra pipe just there. You also need to take that out as well. But on Snail Beach number 4, we don't need to do that. And then we've got underneath the 2 screws that the instructions mention. You can just see them down there, brass coloured. Be careful with these, because brass does tend to be quite a soft metal, so it's very easy with a steel screwdriver to strip that head. So just find and locate the crosshead into the screw, downward pressure, and gently turn. Don't go in there gung-ho, because you run the risk of stripping this thread, and if you do that, you are going to have a huge job on your hands to get into this model. Once both of those are backed off, what item to do is just turn it upside down, tap to let those drop out, and then the actual top of the tank, you can just feel it rock, lift, and that whole assembly lifts away. Now this is actually plastic. I was quite surprised because it did feel like it was metal, but actually it's just a plastic casting, and what we can see inside the model is there's a lot of weight inside the tanks, and the motor itself is down that boiler barrel, and you can actually see the brass flywheel. So this model, even though it is quite tiny, has been fully specced up by Bachmann. I'm really impressed, actually. Opening it up makes me even more impressed. And what we see here is we've got the blanking plate for the Next 18 decoder socket. And with these, no tools required, just lift and take out, take that away. And actually it's quite a complex looking blanking plate. I'm not quite sure why this needs those coils on. I've never seen that on a blanking plate before. It's possibly part of the suppression circuit. And what we're going to do now is we're going to look to the Train-O-Matic Next 18 decoder, and you can see these are really quite tiny. They do contain all of the solder tabs if you want to add a stay alive, although you will have to do some very, very careful thought and work into where in this model there is space for that. Now, with the Next 18 decoders, we look to you can see the connector underneath. We need to make sure that that is located into the slot, and then you'll feel it click into place. And you need to make sure you see there it's completely parallel to the PCB underneath. If it goes in at an angle, then it is not pushed all the way home. And at this stage, what I would recommend is place it on the programming track. Just make sure all is well before we finish reassembly of the locomotive. So I'm going to just assemble the model back together. And with this, just got to very carefully locate the tanks over the chassis weight, thus gently move it down, and you'll feel it go home into place. We can use tweezers to relocate these pipes. They're not glued, they just slot in. Turn the model upside down, and then what we need to do is with the pair of tweezers, because of course them being brass screws by the look of it, they're not going to be attracted to a magnetic screwdriver. I'm just going to drop that in, get the trusty jeweler's screwdriver again, make sure that you have located into the head. Don't try and force it because you will just strip the head. Don't over tighten them. Again, another surefire way of stripping the threads. Next screw, just use the tweezers just to get that to locate. This one's decided to not quite play ball. There we are. Again, gentle pressure and don't over tighten. Right, before we finish, don't forget the detail that does locate back into its dedicated holes in the cab front. Just be careful, you don't want to scratch any of the paintwork. It's just a little bit tricky. You'll feel it go in, and then the actual detail will kind of straighten up there. So there we are. We've got it all in, and there we are, as easy as that to DCC fit. So we turn to scores, and first up, the finish on these models is really actually quite good. I was fooled into thinking that some of the plastic parts were actually metal when they weren't, and that says a lot about the finish being applied. The detail on this is exquisite. There are a lot of separately applied detailing, pipework for example, and there are elements which are unique between the different versions, and I just like that attention to detail. I couldn't really find anything major to fault. They go together well, there's no parts that look like they're struggling to fit, and they actually were pretty robust with handling. And that mechanism is actually surprisingly robust given how delicate it looks. And it's withstood all of the handling which I've given this without any kind of hint of damage. Nothing has fallen off. It's just really well put together. I've done a full DCC fitting on these, and normally if anything's going to fall off, that's when it does. But not a single item of the detail has fallen off, broken, or anything like that. So really, this is another locomotive that I've no hesitation but to give 10 out of 10. On functionality, again, the locomotive ran really, really well. I was a little bit concerned when I saw that front bogie had actually been sort of cheated a little bit with the fixed axle at the back here and only the front axle being able to move. But when it's on the track, you cannot see that, and it does seem to really make sure that this locomotive can go around some really tight corners because there's no bogie to obstruct on those cylinders. And it really is quite a neat and clever design to make this model work in miniature. I've had it going round Minas Tatis, which actually is quite generous on the curves. It was built to accommodate a Hellion Manning Wardle, and these just romped through all of the point work. There was no derailment, anything at all like that. If there was one gripe, it's that it doesn't come with a hook over the top of the couplings, and this sometimes meant that wagons might slip off the back because the track does twist and turn a little bit, just like real narrow gauge track often does too, lightly laid and with very, very poor earthworks. And I do think that an extra hook, just like we've seen with all of the rest of the wagons from various manufacturers, would have made a little bit of difference. I checked in the additional parts in the box and none are supplied for fitting afterwards by the user. But really we're just splitting hairs here because this thing ran with all the silky smoothness of a Swiss watch. This is really great craftsmanship, so I'm going to give it a 9.9 out of 10. When it came to ease of use, the Dcc Fitting, the Next 18 decoder socket, I'd been sceptical about these when I first started seeing them appear, but actually when you use them, they do make things quite easy to insert the decoder, and it's very easy to make sure it's located the right way round first time every time, and they do seem more robust than the way they look suggests. One area though which was a little bit tricky was making sure that all the pipework detail was moved out of the way before undoing those two brass screws underneath. The brass screws themselves, I don't know why they're brass. There's probably a very good reason, but I couldn't quite fathom it. And I did feel that they were just a little bit too easy to perhaps damage with the head of the screwdriver. That said, again, splitting hairs, because they did actually come apart really readily and easily. The screw threads were robust, and the screws went in positively and locked all of the parts back together without any damage under my careful hands. It's not the most straightforward of DCC fittings that I've done, but it did do really quite well. What I do like about this is that it natively supports sound, and it says in the instructions that there is a speaker pre-fitted in here. Although whilst I didn't actually see it, it does make sound fitting this model a doddle if that's the route you want to go down. Just buy a Next 18 sound decoder with the appropriate sound file loaded in, and there you have it. Just plug that in. No need to worry about speaker, and I like that. I'd like to see more of that coming from locomotives from manufacturers in the future. I think it's little things like that that really do make these things so much easier for the user. And really it's quite amazing to think that a model this small can support sound when we've been struggling with double O gauge models, trying to find that space for sound, and yet here is a model so tiny it just fits on my fingertips and it just natively supports that. So I'm going to give this a 9.3 out of 10. When it comes to aesthetics, this model really does have it to pat. There wasn't anything that I could fault with this, and I often found myself looking at it and comparing it with the one that I saw at Statfold Barn, and actually Bachmann have captured the look and feel and aesthetics of the real model so well. I love the detail differences between the different versions. The fact that Bachmann have tooled up for these really does show that they've gone above and beyond. And it runs so well, silky smooth. Nothing has been compromised to get the aesthetics right as far as I could tell. The one area though which I felt didn't quite live up to the rest of the model is that glazing in the cab. With the open style of cab, especially like this Southern Railway example in the form of Sid, it is very noticeable even when it's running on the track once you start looking for it. I know that you can disguise that with a crew, but it did feel that there was one little spot that let it down when everything else on this model is so superb. So I'm going to give this a 9.5 out of 10. When it came to value for money, these models are, gram for gram, very expensive, but let's not get into price too much. I managed to pick these up for around the £125 to £130 mark. They are out there available for that kind of money at the moment, and given just how much that Bachmann have managed to pack into these locomotives, you're paying for Swiss craftsmanship here, and really it is just that. There is so much good about this model. If this had come from one of the other European manufacturers, the models that we've come to expect in HOE, I think you wouldn't have been surprised if this had topped out at the £200 to £300 mark. That's what some of these narrow gauge locomotives are costing from the other manufacturers. So the fact that you can pick this up for around the £125 to the £130 mark really does speak volumes about the value for money. And we've talked a little bit on this channel about what actually goes into making one of these. And again, I defy you to make one of these from a kit, to paint it, to finish it, to assemble it, to make it run this well, this smoothly and this reliably, to pack it with all of these features, to make it DCC ready, and to have it natively support sound. I defy you to be able to do all of that and end up with a model this good and that costs less than what this retails at. So value for money, I'm going to give this an 8 out of 10. And that gives us a final score of 46.7 out of 50. That is another respectable high score for what is an exquisite model. I love these. They're one of the locomotives that really has turned me on to the idea of modelling in OO9. And I'm really looking forward to some of the other models that Bachmann has announced in their OO9 range. They're giving the competition a great run for their money, and I am so pleased to be able to add both of these locomotives to my collection. I'm Jenny Kirk, and I approve of these models. Well, I hope you really enjoyed that and that was really informative for you. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and also check out our affiliate links where you can go and find your own versions of these magnificent Bachmann Baldwins. Also, don't forget you can check us out over on Patreon and help us to make the videos that you want to see from the channel. So look, you just take really great care of yourself, and until next time, happy modelling. Stay well. Bye for now. Today's video is sponsored by Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders designed to be fully compatible with every manufacturer's locomotive. Visit train-o-matic.com to browse the full range and see what they've got suitable for you. I'd like to send out a huge thanks to everybody who supports me on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to Anthony Kidson, Michael Churchwood, Anthony Hunt, William Wade, Wayne Johns, Offshore Allen, oorail.co.uk, Tepic, Michael Lockie, Helen Sink, Peter Bolton, Brian and Dorothy Mudd, Gary Lewis, David Quinn, Sparky 107, George Botterini, Andy Finch, Chris Moss, Robert Sears, MD of San Juan Model Company and Grant Line Products, Sam Yates, Dale Williams, and Mo Henry. Thank you. Without you guys, I couldn't do this.